So welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here. We have 108 participants on the Zoom tonight. Jessica has muted all of us if you've just joined us. Jessica is the membership chair for Washington Audubon Society, and she's been running our Zooms for us for the last few months. Thank you so much, Jess. And I see Mike Sefton's here. He's our program chair and vice president on the board of Washington Audubon. And I'm sure some other board members are on here. I think Keith Dickey, our treasurer, is here. Anyway, welcome. Strange times in. I'm the president of Audubon Society. I've been the president here for 6 years. It's kind of hard for me to believe. I started in June of 2014, so thanks for still keeping me around. It's a great job if you could get it. So we jumped into the program. We introduced ourselves. We have way too many people here to do that. I want to welcome any new members of Washington Audubon and members, people on call tonight or not members. You're most welcome. If you would like to join Washington Audubon Society, you can go to our website, www.washingtonaudubon.org, and it's very fun. Is my audio messed up?
Yeah, it was getting very digitized.
Is it better now?
It was touch and go. Why don't you just repeat very quickly, if you could, just a couple of the points you said.
Okay, I'm Juliette Berger, Washington Audubon president. If you are not a member, you're certainly welcome. If you would like to join, we would love to have you. So please go to our website, washington.org, and it's easy to join. Very okay. I'm going to have some other in the background. People. Let me know if I sound any better now. I'm going to take you to the other room where I usually do my Zooms and try turning off my video. Okay. I will try turning off my video. So how do I sound now?
That sounds
better again?
Juliet. Yeah. Sorry, folks. Thanks for bearing with us.
Thanks for bearing with me. I haven't had this problem before, but what the heck. Okay, so again, go to washingtonaudubon.org if you want to join us. Of course, you're welcome, whether you are a member or not, in any of our programs. Almost everything we do is free. Right now, we're not holding any field trips altogether. We will have some events like eBirds October Big Day on the 17th of October. We'll chat about it on Facebook, but we won't be getting together in person. We're still going to be a some good folks coming up. We're very lucky to have Josh Haas here. This is her here. I think our migration is going to be at the Detroit River Watch tomorrow Friday. This is the best. Am I breaking up still?
Yeah, Julia, should we have Mike introduce Scott, and if we get your internet connected at the end, we can maybe have a recap of upcoming.
Introduce Josh. Yeah.
Let's have Mike introduce Josh.
Yeah. Okay.
Josh got his start with Raptors at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. He spent 7 seasons as the relief hawk counter with the Detroit River Hawk Watch. And using his photography and videography skills, he created the movie Hawks on the Wing, which I believe we'll see part of tonight. And you can also purchase that from Josh's website, I believe. Take it away, Josh.
Okay, Jessica, mic check. Just want to make sure you can hear and see me okay. All right, great, thumbs up. Thank you so much, Mike, and Juliet as well. It's nice to be with all of you tonight for, as you're going to find out, one of my favorite topics. So Raptor ID. I'm a huge birder. Obviously, that spawned into my photography and videography, but Raptors are certainly one of my biggest passions. So I'm happy to bring Raptor ID to you folks, and even if it's virtual, we're still going to have a good time. So one of the other aspects of this program is, with us being so close to Detroit River, and the fact that they are right in the heart of migration, I will feature a little bit about Detroit tonight to hopefully encourage you folks to maybe venture out there. I would be very careful doing so. Obviously, we want to keep our counters and volunteer coordination staff as safe as possible. So maybe go to the Detroit River Hawk Watch website and check on some of their latest safety protocols, just to make sure you can have what you need ahead of time to follow those rules. So, but it's a wonderful place, especially a wonderful place to learn Raptor ID. But before we get into a little bit about Raptor ID and Detroit River, I always like to start my Raptor programs with a few video clips of some Raptors doing some pretty amazing things, just as a means to get everybody excited for what I hope to be a pretty informative program. So the first video that we're going to see is of our cover slide photo. It's a female, actually. This is an American kestrel hover hunting, and then she's hover hunting, not kiting, because she's flapping her wings. But notice the head and how locked on and stiff that head is. They have so many extra vertebrae in their neck that these birds are amazing at rocking all over the place, but their head and their eyes can stay absolutely locked on, looking for the prey that they're after. And so I just love that video clip because it really shows just some raw nature of what the kestrels go through in order to find their prey. The next one is going to feature a cousin of the American kestrel, a Merlin. And this Merlin I captured unknowingly catching a bird on the wing in migration at the Cape May, New Jersey Hawk Watch. So you hopefully, I can't see your chat, but add in if you guys think you can see this little songbird come into view and the bird get it. You just got it. So if you missed it, it's gone. But rest assured, I'm going to show you another version where I stop the action and we're going to see the bird come in, and I'm going to use my mouse to show you the songbird's going to come in from the upper left, right there. Now watch the Merlin roll over to catch this bird. Right there.
Is she lying?
And what was awesome is I didn't even know I had captured that until later that night when I was reviewing footage. And I couldn't believe what I saw. So I always like to share that. And the last one is some footage that came from the Mackinac Raptor Watch up there at the Straits. And these are two bald eagles, one of which is chasing another one. Now the adult is chasing the immature bird right now. But as this went on, they switched roles, and now the juvenile bird is going after the adult. But watch what happens when the juvenile jumps up against that adult. Bam. Now this is not a mating behavior. This bird is going after prey that the adult has, and now they're tumbling. And that's some bits of the fish that were going away there, but just awesome, you know, just to be in the moment and not only experience and connect with that bit of nature, but also to capture it. So I hope some of those video clips got you a little excited for tonight. And before we get into the more identification portion of the talk, I do want to talk a little bit, just give a very high level precursor on migration. So Raptors are diurnal migrants, so they're migrating during the day, which offers us a great opportunity to experience it. So most, especially the Budios, broadwings especially, they're going to use what's called thermals to get from point A to point B. And so in its simplest terms, I mean, thermals are very, very scientific, way, way, way above my head. But the simplest way to think about it is it's just warm air that's rising. And they're columns of this warm air, and the birds can find these columns of warm air, and it gives them free lift. And so what broadwings, especially a lot of the bootios and some of the others will use these thermals for, is free lift to rise in altitude and get as high as they can until the thermal activity kind of dies out. And then they'll stream out. And so these three arrows up at the top represent the stream out. And if you ever go to a hawk watch and you're experiencing kettling raptors, whether it's, you know, turkey vultures or broadwings or what have you, you'll always hear someone say something about the stream out, and that's what this is. And that is at that point when the birds start to begin heading either south or north, depending on if it's spring or fall. So the birds right now are heading south, and when they stream out is when the counters actually count them. When they're kettling and circling and rising in altitude, that wouldn't be an efficient way to count the birds, because you'd never be able to single a bird out from being double counted, triple counted, or what have you. So that's when they're counted. And so the next question a lot of people always have is, well, why don't these birds just kettle across the Great Lakes and stream over them like there's no problem? Well, as you can see here, thermal air pretty much dies off very quickly over water. So bodies of water are most raptors' nightmare, and they represent barriers. And so the cool thing about those barriers, though, is it offers us, especially in the Midwest, anyone that's around the Great Lakes, an absolute paradise for hawk watching. So much like, you know, down here, we can see this Kittatinny Ridge. There's several hawk watches down here, and the ridge, you know, funnels birds right through here. That offers a great paradise for them. For us, these big lakes offer barriers that push these birds where we want them to go. And so oftentimes, depending on whether it's spring or fall, you can kind of time and figure out where the birds are going to kind of choke into the funnel point. And so as we can see here, these birds oftentimes will come up against Lake Ontario, and they'll hit that shoreline, and then they have a decision. Basically, do I go left or right? And when they're coming down here, if they go right, they follow the shoreline oftentimes all the way this way. And guess what happens to be right here? The Detroit River Hawk Watch, and also the Holiday Beach Hawk Watch on the Ontario side, which right now none of us on the US side have the ability to go over there. So Detroit is really it this year for us. And so what happens, as you can see here, these birds will hit up against the Great Lakes, and it ends up funneling them or pushing them down shorelines to specific choke points. And those choke points are where Hawkwatch sites are set up. So over here, we've got Duluth, Minnesota, where Hawk Ridge is. And right here, we've got, like I said before, Holiday Beach and Detroit River Hawkwatch. So it offers us, especially for you folks on the east side of the state, a pretty quick and easy opportunity for hawk watching, which is really neat. So the Detroit River Hawkwatch is a pretty special place. And oh, I have an auto. Bear with me. Didn't realize I had an auto transition on that slide. The Detroit River Hawkwatch hasn't always been the Detroit River Hawkwatch. It wasn't when I was counting there. But the site is still there, even though the protocols changed slightly over the years. The birds don't care about any of that. They still come through, and you have every opportunity to go and experience it. And so it is a fall site. It's a fall site that doesn't disappoint, especially in September, right coming up. I mean, the timing could not be any better for you folks, because usually the third week of September is when the broadwing push happens, and the broadwing hawks usually come, the major numbers come within about a 2 to 4 day period. So if you look at hawkcount.org, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, and look at last year, they had to the tune of about 75,000 broadwings come within 2 days. And the rest were days of, 500 here, 10 here, 800 there. But broadwings tend to group up and migrate in big numbers. And that is a phenomenon that is quite the experience. So I highly recommend it if you're able to get over there, spend some days. You can't just go and see it. Oftentimes takes a lot of work and repetitive time at the watch. Some of the really cool aspects of Detroit, that's a fantastic place to see golden eagles, mid-October through early part of November. It's not, I mean, even when I was there, it wasn't uncommon to get 10, 15, 20 goldens in one day if you had a good weather component. It's still that way today. They can get great numbers. So that's oftentimes a bird that people will want to see and go after, and Detroit's a great place to go. I think one of the more underrated species at Detroit is turkey vulture. If you look at their past data, they have wonderful flights of turkey vultures. And in fact, just a little marketing push here for Humana. I'm actually going to be at Detroit River Hawk Watch on October 15th doing a Zoom virtual live hawk watch through Humana, and I'm hoping to feature some flights of turkey vultures. So we'll see, but stay tuned for that. And of course, like I talked about broadwings, they have some just stellar broadwing numbers. And probably one of my best days at Detroit for broadwings was about 85,000 in a day that I was counting. And it's just swirling tornadoes of raptors that you just can't explain the joy that comes with it until you experience it. So I wish you that experience, all of you. And so speaking of broadwings, I will show a little video clip of a small group. This is considered a very small group of broadwings. Broadwings don't typically flap their wings that much, especially in migration. They're masters of soaring. However, this is actually the end of a stream out. And so they're at a pretty low altitude right now. And here in a second, you're going to see all the birds start coming back on the left side of the screen. And these birds have now found the new thermal, and they're starting to kettle again. And kettling is the circling of these groups, this big group of birds. Now you can see them coming back. They're going to start to reform the kettle. And now these birds will start climbing in altitude all over again. And when they reach the top and start losing that lift, they're going to stream out again. And guess what? They're going to rinse and repeat that 80, 100 miles a day, all the way down to Central and South America. So it's a pretty awesome phenomenon to experience. And you are right on the cusp of seeing that happen any day now at Detroit. So some tips in terms of weather. At Detroit, any kind of north component is really a good sign. Most hawk watches, you want to see a rising barometric pressure, that barometer rising leading up to a good day with some north winds, and either clear skies or partly cloudy skies can indicate a really good flight day. Although we've had what seems to be the quintessential perfect day and nothing happens. So sometimes the birds don't read the books that we do, and they kind of have their own plan. But it pays to kind of look ahead at that weather. I really like a little bit of east wind at Detroit, especially as a photographer. It tends to kind of push the birds towards Lake Erie Metropark, where the site is located. So as a photographer, that obviously gives you a little bit more opportunity. And just word of warning, just to level set the expectation, Detroit is not the spot to see raptors really close. It's never been that site. And sometimes people go with this false sense of, expectation that they're going to see stuff really close. And oftentimes that's not going to happen at Detroit. But while that's a con for many people, the pro to that, though, is it offers an immense learning opportunity. And, a lot of people used to ask me all the time back then, how did you learn this stuff so quickly? And I really firmly believe Detroit is one of the main reasons I could learn it so fast, because it forces you to identify using proper identification tips, because you can't see field marks. You can't see a red tail a mile out on these birds. And so you have to look at their flight to be able to truly identify them. So go and check out Detroit. Again, I'm going to be there on October 15th, socially distancing with the folks there, but also going live on Zoom and Facebook. So keep in tune with Hawks on the Wing, and I'm sure Juliet and Mike will share some of that as well. Moving on, just talk a little bit about Hawk Count. So I mentioned Hawk Count. HawkCount.org is really the master repository and database for all of North American, to include Canada and Mexico. all North American migration data for raptors. So not every single site is on hawk count. So from a Humana perspective, we're always trying to encourage more and more sites to get on, but we have quite the collection already, and it's a wonderful resource. So to learn a little bit more about Detroit, go on over to hawkcount.org, and you can go down here and find a hawk watch. You'll select the drop down to find Detroit River, and you can learn about, you know, the timing of when you want to go based on the species you want to see, and what kind of days, you know, in the past have brought really good numbers, and then you can match that weather for what you're looking ahead to plan your trip, and kind of match up all that stuff and really increase your odds of seeing a lot more birds. So Hawk Count is a wonderful resource. I use it all the time. I follow migration on it for the sites that I really like pretty much daily. And then anytime I'm in a migration, you know, spring or fall, if we're traveling, I'm always on Hawk Count looking for the closest site to figure out, okay, when can I sneak away on this work trip to, you know, go see some raptors. So it's a wonderful resource. But part of that resource is looking for that timing. I mentioned looking up migration timing, and it's important to know that all these birds are migrating at different times. So if you really want to go see a rough-legged hawk, now is not the time to go to Detroit. They're still way, way, way north of us, and you're not going to want to come till November. And I'm going to warn you, bundle up, because any lakeshore site's going to be cold in November. But the timing is important. So if you want to see something specific, you can look up when those big numbers come and plan your trip accordingly. So, you know, I love to say that, you know, bird identification is really where art and science come together. And the reason I say that is because there's all kinds of science behind identifying birds, especially from a banding point of view. You know, if you're a bander, if you've ever been to a banding site, and you can see all the measurements they're taking, the different individual feathers they're looking at, and little things that they're looking for to determine, say, sex or weight or what's going on with this particular species. That's very scientific to me. But where the art comes in, if you ever go to a hawk watch and spend time around a hawk counter or someone who's really good at identifying these birds in flight, there's some science there, but it's an art form. You know, some of these people are just naturally able to identify, and they can look at this bird in flight and get a feel for what identification is correct. And so that's where I kind of say that's more of an art form, and they kind of, you know, come together. And what's really important to get across here is that you cannot just use one single trait to determine a definitive ID. So the best example of that is so many people will see an accipiter, you know, that forest dweller, like a sharp-shinned or a Cooper's hawk. If they see one of those birds with a square tail, bam, they automatically know it's a Sharpie. And I'm here to tell you that upwards of 10% of both species that come through in a migration site can have either a round tail or square tail, depending on what's going on in that bird's life, whether it be a molt activity going on, or maybe they got into a scuffle and there's some issues with their tail. So there is a crazy amount of Sharpies that come through that look to have round tails. And so point being, you can't just use one trait. And what I tell people is it's about multiple pieces of the puzzle that you have to put together, and all of a sudden that image starts to appear and you can definitively identify that bird. So I think my PowerPoint is auto saving. Thank you, technology. And all my videos, it's like 5 gigs worth, so it takes a minute. Okay, so I always like to tell people too, you know, in my work, I have, you know, all these training courses that I have to continually do so that I keep my, you know, education in check. And so I always like to tell people, you know, have this mindset that you're always learning. Don't ever for a second think that you've learned it all and you're an expert. Because I'm here to tell you, even the best of the best will have times when they cannot identify a bird. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't let your pride, you know, win over, you know, your ability to have fun. You know, it's okay to be wrong sometimes. I'm wrong. You come hawk watching with me, I'll make a mistake, I guarantee it. But it's all about a continuous learning experience and having an attitude to just keep at it. And that's what I really like to encourage in people. So when you look at this slide, this is always, I love asking my, you know, at my talks, what people think of this slide. Excuse me. So the question is, how many raptor species do you see on this slide? Go ahead and enter them in the chat. I'm not going to see them because with everything going on with this presentation, I can't see the chat. Go ahead and enter how many different species you see on this slide. And I'm just going to tell you, after now that I've blot on for a minute and given you a second, it's one. So these are all Sharpies. And point being, I don't know about you, but this angle, that tail in the upper left looks a little round to me. Looks a little round here too, even though it's pretty squared off. This is the top middle bird is a classic Sharp-shinned Hawk, just absolute classic all the way. But the point being is these birds never always 100% of the time look like this top middle bird. Depending on the winds and what's going on, whether they're missing feathers or in a molt or whatever else is going on, they can sometimes fly a little differently or look a little differently. And so that's why that puzzle type approach is so important. In addition to that, I'm sure all of you have field guides at your disposal, like the brilliant Peterson guide or the Sibley field guide to birds. And I'll focus on Peterson real quick. Peterson was an amazing, historic, really jump forward way back when in bird identification, and his arrows pointing to field marks on birds is really what changed everything for the novice, such as ourselves. And so something interesting that happens though is with raptors, as you can see this peregrine going into full shadow. How often do you look up at a hawk watch, see a peregrine coming across, or any raptor for that matter, and how often do you see all this brilliant color and field mark? Well, I don't know about you, it's not very often. And what we normally see is this far right-hand bird that's just pure silhouette, especially when the sun's directly overhead, or maybe it's spring and we're looking south into the sun as the birds are coming at us. I mean, south hawk watches are a pain. Because of this, spring hawk watches. And so that field mark identification technique falls short. And so we have to make up for that. And the way we do that is looking at the way the bird is flapping its wings, the shape of the bird in flight, behavior in flight, all these little flight characteristics that are nothing of what we read about in the Sibley or Peterson guide. It's not that they fall short necessarily, it's just a different form of identification that's just not what we're used to. And like I said earlier, it's all about a puzzle. To me, you don't need all 500 puzzle pieces to see the image start to come together. You only need a few pieces of the puzzle to figure out that this is a red-tailed hawk that's coming into view. And even if that last puzzle piece comes in showing you a red tail that definitively tells you, oh yeah, duh, that's a red tail because I see the red tail once he's close. You don't need that at all. You need a couple other characteristics to figure out, oh, this is a red-tailed hawk. And you can 100% do that without any field marks. So in terms of our general migrating families, now I'm talking about what we're going to see here in Detroit. There's other families like kites. There's other birds that you're not going to see on my list here. But in general, these are the big families. So I mentioned accipiters. These are your forest-dwelling hawks like Sharp-shinned Cooper's hawks. You've got falcons like the amazing peregrine falcon, but also the American kestrel, as well as the Merlin. Our bootios, like our beautiful red tail, like this Eastern Borealis red-tailed hawk right here. Red-shouldered, rough-legged hawks, things like that. Eagles, we're starting to get into some smaller groups. We only have two that we're going to see here, either the bald or golden eagle. So that's nice as we narrow things down. If we know it's an eagle and it's not a red tail or a bootio or an accipiter or a falcon, hey, we can throw all of them out and only concentrate on those eagles. So now we've narrowed the field down to only two. And now you can just concentrate on a much smaller number, which is much less overwhelming. Then, of course, we're going to talk through Harriers, Osprey, the Vultures, things like that. So to get started, I'll just kind of walk through what this slide looks like because every slide's going to look the same. We've got a single picture of the bird, which again is just one picture, so that doesn't take us too far. But what's cool is we've got the glide profile as well as a soaring profile, and a lot of these species, they'll change whether they're gliding or soaring, which is pretty cool. On the left-hand side, I've got a range map for everybody. So if you're interested in where they go, where they were coming from, or whether you can see them breeding here in the summer when you're out on your walks, that's a nice little handy resource. And then at the bottom, I just give you a few quick, some of the more important identification tips with emphasis on flight now. This is not about perched birds. This is mostly about flighted raptors. So our Sharpie is, in fact, we call the Sharp-shinned Hawks Sharpies. Cooper's Hawks are normally Coops, so just for you folks that may not know that. They have an incredibly fast, very snappy wing beat. But what's cool about it is it's more from the shoulder or the wrist outward, where like a Cooper's Hawk's going to use the whole wing, okay? And so you'll see it in the video here. I've got videos for every species you're going to see tonight, and we'll talk through that really snappy, kind of fluttery wing beat. Like I said, be careful with the tail. It's just one piece of that puzzle. It is a cool piece that we can use. This one obviously is showing a nice squared off tail. And what's really cool though, and what often you will see with Sharpies, is a very small looking head that's tucked back in, and the shoulders are thrown way forward. Those shoulders or wrists are pushed way forward, and we're going to see that here in the video right now. So this is a classic Sharpie. Now watch as he's soaring. When he turns around, you're going to see the bird's on very flat wings. No upturned dihedral, very, very flat, right there. Also notice that the tail comes to a very tight pinch point before it hits the kind of broad looking wings. And look how tiny that head is. Look for the head when he comes around. It looks absolutely tiny. Now look at that wing flap, how fast it is. Very, very fluttery, almost butterfly-like. And remember, from the wrist outward, it's not using the whole wing. Look at that long tail, very tiny looking head. Bird's also soaring in very, very tight circles. It's also an unsteady bird as well, so you're going to see it flat more than the heavier coop, which we'll see next. Notice in this glide, the wings are drooped ever so slightly, just slightly at the end. And that's a classic Sharpie in a glide. See how the shoulders there are pushed forward? It creates this perfect pocket for the head to sit, just fit really nicely within that whole pocket. Right there. That right there, they always, when they come overhead like that and they glide, they look like little button mushrooms. You ever see those at the grocery store? It looks like a button mushroom just gliding right over. Some people think I'm crazy about that, but that's what it looks like to me. You got to find something that connects with you and make it work. That's how this is going to be retained a lot easier. So the Cooper's Hawk, relative to the Sharpie, notice the head on this bird is projecting much further forward. Sorry, click the screen. The soaring profile, now we start to see a little upturned dihedral, which you're not going to see in the Sharpie. So that's a really cool tip when you see a soaring bird. Look for that glide profile. Where the Sharpie has a real fluttery, much quicker wing beat from the wrist, the Cooper's Hawk is going to have a heavier, slightly slower wing beat, and it's it uses the entire wing, not just from the wrist outward. Now, as we see this video, check out this bird's head. It's going to just be so much further forward and much more substantial compared to the Sharpie. This bird is going to show a little upturned dihedral. You're going to see it as it turns around right about there, just ever so slightly turned upwards. And the bird is just more tubular, so it gives this appearance of kind of a lengthier body. And notice the pinch point here is gone. It's not that tiny pinch point where the tail meets the body. The tail is a little bit more substantial. And that wing flap, just classic from the body outward. That's just a classic soaring Cooper's Hawk right there. Look at that wing flap. It's using the entire wing, a little slower. Notice the bird's using its tail more often in soar. It's more stable. So the bird's not being brought off course in the wind. It's able to hold its track just fine. Again, a slightly slower, heavier wing beat. Pretty well in control in the glide, but much like the Sharpie, you're going to see just an ever so slightly downturned wing in a glide. So I do want to focus a little bit on the comparison. Notice this little pocket here where the shoulders are thrown forward, that the head is smaller and it can just kind of sit nicely within. This bird is longer. It just appears a little more slender and tubular, and the head projects way forward. Also look at this perpendicular leading edge to the wing where the shoulders aren't thrown forward. I will warn you, coops tend to throw their shoulders forward in heavy winds when they're gliding and flapping. So that is something to be aware of when you're in a heavy wind situation. So let's compare them.
The Sharp-shinned versus Cooper's comparison represents one of the most difficult pairings, but there are clues that help distinguish the two. Notice the Cooper's hawk on the right has a longer, bulkier tail that also feels more round. Don't forget, however, the round versus square tail doesn't always hold true. Also notice the Sharpie on the left shows a smaller head that is tucked back closer to the body, where the Coop's head projects forward. While soaring, Sharpies will flap more often because they are less stable, where the Coop holds steady. Also look as the Sharp-shinned Hawk is making tighter circles. The bird is actually starting to get ahead of the Coop. Comparing the wing flap is easier when side by side. Notice the Cooper's hawk has a slightly slower wing beat, but more importantly, it's using more of the entire wing, whereas the Sharpie is quicker, snappier, and flaps more from the wrist outward. Check out this Sharpie displaying its tendency to flap more often, where the Coop is gliding longer between flaps.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. So just a little sales pitch. That is what makes Hawks on the Wing special. I have 28 side-by-side videos of the more important species that you're going to see. So if you struggle to compare Coops and Sharpies, you can play that over and over and watch and look for all the little things that separate them. You know, turkey vulture and golden eagle, bald eagle, all those birds are there, and we're going to have a chance to view some of those at the end of this presentation. So to get back to it, just a little bit more in terms of comparing Sharpies and Coops. Just this is the one spot where we're going to talk about perching birds. And so notice the more squared off head here on the Cooper's hawk on the left. It's the left for me. I assume it's left for you as well. And more rounded head here on the right, which is our stockier looking overall. Remember I said the Cooper's on the left. Here's going to be more erect or more tubular, where the Sharpie here we can see here is more compact or stocky. The other thing that we like to look for too, other than the shape of the head, notice this light coloring on the nape or the back of the neck. A lot of people, the way they get it, they keep them straight, is they say Coop cap, because it looks like the bird has a cap, where on the right here, the Sharpie looks like it's wearing a helmet. It's dark all the way on the back. So that's something to look for. That's usually a little easier on adults to see. The other thing is, remember how we talked about square versus round tails. So just to give you some perspective, on the left here by this red arrow, you can see here it blown up. These are actually graduated tail feathers, and that's what gives that Cooper's hawk more of that rounded tail appearance. Where on the right here, the Sharpie, all of those tail feathers end at the same point. And so that gives them that, typically that more squared off look. The other thing that I love to show people, Sharpies, like we see here on the right, they have these alien-like looking toes. I mean, they are skinny legged. They look like something you could just break. And especially that middle toe is just so long. It hangs way down, and the feet look alien-like to me. In a Cooper's hawk, think about a number 2 pencil. When I was in school, it was all about the number 2 pencil. For my kids, not so much. It's all computers now. But think about that number 2 pencil, and that's about the thickness of a Cooper's hawk's legs. Much more substantial feet and toes overall. Okay, the last one in our Accipiter lineup is our northern goshawk. So these are incredible birds, just absolutely powerful. And also a very rare one to see. So the negative side of rare species that you see means you get less practice with them. So that means they're always going to represent one of your harder species to learn. Goshawks don't go very far south. Often, they'll just head a couple states south of us. They won't go much further, or they'll kind of trail a little bit more west. And they're a bird that you really need to come in November to see. They like to come late, and so bundle up and come after goshawks. It's a fun time. It's cold, but it's worth the wait, as the folks at Detroit will say, because the diversity of the northern species is really, really fun. These birds look more like bootios. In fact, a lot of times you'll read in the books that if you first at a distance have a bird that appears to be a buteo, but then gets closer and turns into an accipiter, it is always a northern goshawk. Notice the wings are much more muscular on the trailing edge, especially in the secondaries right here. Also notice the body, where the tail meets the body, it almost looks like an extension of the body. We're going to see that in the video a little bit. And remember how I said coops protrude their head forward more than Sharpies? Well, it's the same true as for goshawks, especially in a glide. I will tell you, in a soar, goshawks have this tendency to kind of hide their heads. I don't know how they do it, but they do. But in a glide, as we'll see in the video, they absolutely have massive heads that they protrude forward in a glide. And to me, it looks like a snapping turtle putting its head out of its shell. It's so far forward. And so I love to see them in a glide, because you can see them, they'll lift their head up and you can see them moving around from, you know, a half a mile out. It's insane. Pretty steep droop to the wings when they're gliding, and their wing beat is much, much more powerful. It's rhythmic and it's deeper than both the Sharpie and the coop. Let's see this guy in flight. So pretty flat winged on a soar, but look at the substantial difference in that tail and how much more tail is showing. They also tend to fan their tail more in a soar. So if you see an accipiter with a fan tail, that's a good trick. But notice pretty flat winged here on a soar. When he comes around, look at how the body here just blends into the tail. Look at that head. And look at how much more muscular these secondaries are in the back, the trailing edge of this bird. So still a tubular body, but it's a little bit thicker, a little bit more substantial, and it's all about that tail that just kind of blends in. It looks like it's part of the body. It's not a tail, it's part of the body. Look at that rhythmic. We'll see it again here. Should be a very rhythmic, much more powerful wing beat. It's very even, where the Sharpie and the coop tend to be a little bit more all over the place. These heavy birds are incredibly stable, and they just stay rock solid on the line, just like we're seeing here. Very little loss in altitude. They do some flaps and they stay right on their track. All right, so that rounds out our accipiters. So now we're going to go into the falcons, and we'll start with our American kestrel. To me, this is a bird with banana peels for wings. And they slap the air. They're very fluttery. They like to rise and fall in altitude, whether they like to, that it happens. And they are sexually dimorphic. So if you are lucky enough to see one close up, you're going to see different coloration between the male and the female, which is fun. But guess what? It doesn't matter. They fly the exact same way. So if you don't see colors, you can use their flight pattern to definitively identify them. Very fluttery wing beat. I always like to say they're like little butterflies, very dainty. And that rise and fall in altitude, and they're kind of flying all over the place. They don't keep their line real well. And that's important, because the closest bird to a kestrel is going to be our Merlin, and Merlins hold their line. They always do. And so that's something that you can look for. If you have a bird that's real fluttery, kind of a fluttered wing beat, it's all over the place, that's rarely ever a Merlin. So let's see what these guys look like. Another good word for it is they're quite buoyant, very light looking, like any little wind can throw them off course or give them altitude. Look at the shape of the wings, long, like little banana peels, 2 banana peels with a body. Absolutely flat, soar profile. Notice the bird, you can see in the clouds here, he's going to go up and down quite a lot. He's getting blown around quite a bit. This was a really windy day at Cape May, New Jersey. And she actually is getting blown all over the place. In a glide, you're going to see the tips of the wings slightly drooped, but also notice the classic falcon shape, very slender winged, pointed backwards, very, very slender and pointed backwards. They're known for speed. Look at that wing beat, very fluttery. It's very shallow, doesn't go deep below or above the body. There's that drooped wing you can see in a glide, rising and lowering, especially as it stops. They lose altitude pretty quickly. And that's our American kestrel. Now in Hawks on the Wing, you get audio for all of these videos, but I feel it's more personal to talk to you during these videos, so there's no audio here other than just me. So next on the list of our falcons is our Merlin, and you know, I can't own this. You know, one of my mentors, Jeff Schultz, many of you probably have heard of Jeff Schultz or know of Jeff. He is a king in Raptor ID, one of my mentors. And I love how he describes Merlins. They're kestrels on steroids. And so they are 100%, they're like a kestrel that went to a gym and went overboard and became a bodybuilder. Look at these wings. They're not as slender. Remember the banana peel-like wings of the kestrel? You're never going to see that on a Merlin. They're more substantially winged, and they're also more stocky. Merlins also like to hug tree lines. They like to fly very low in altitude. So oftentimes at a hawk watch, if you're lucky to see a Merlin, more often than not, you're seeing the back end of a Merlin as it's already past you. They're very hard to pick up. They like to fly low. They hold their lines. Paul Cipher, another name that you're probably familiar with, another one of my mentors, he always describes Merlin's wing beats like a combustion engine on a car where the cylinder is going up and down repetitively in a very even, steady, powerful motion. Never ending, that's your Merlin. They rarely soar. When I got all of my Merlin footage for Hawks on the Wing at Cape May, New Jersey, I saw over 200 Merlins in the 2 days that I was there, and I only saw 3 birds soar of that entire group. The rest were how I described them in the beginning. You see them at the very end, they fly through and they're gone. They're fearless. They go after everything, whether that's a kestrel or all the way up to a golden eagle. They don't like anybody. And they're just fearless. And so let's see what this guy looks like in flight. Here's our Merlin. Look for those stockier, heavier looking wings, especially as the wings meet the body, where those secondary flight feathers are. You'll see them as just looking more stocky. The birds, here's one of those 3 soaring birds, one of the very few that I was able to experience. Slightly drooped wings. Notice they're not like banana peels here. They're more flat or perpendicular on the trailing edge. They go straight out to the tips. They're not swept back like the kestrel was. Fantail. Now we get to see the bird holding its line, flapping very powerfully, very even, and it's holding its line the whole way. The birds are incredible with the speed. And at a moment's notice, you think they're already flying fast, they can kick in the afterburner and they're gone. If they want to go after something, it's like, wow, how did they even kick the speed in? Just it's mind-boggling to see the speed that these guys can create. Last of our falcons that we're going to focus on is the peregrine. So obviously these guys have grown in popularity with birders because we're starting to see them nesting in cities all over the place. Look at the range map. Look where they're breeding. Way up in the Arctic on cliff ledges, things like that, or out west. Nowhere near us. And now these guys are common. I mean, it's not hard to go to Ann Arbor. Yeah, what is it, Juliet? I think it's the bell tower or some tower at U of M. You can see the peregrines anytime you want. And so, yeah, so it's just been wonderful to be able to connect with these birds so close to home. You're never going to have problems identifying a peregrine over a kestrel. I will tell you though, sometimes peregrines can look a lot like Merlins, especially when they're by themselves or vice versa, because it's hard to judge distance. And because of that hard judge of distance, that also means that judging size is hard to impossible. So they can be similar. I find that in a soar, you know, they soar in very steady, wide circles. Oftentimes their tails fan way out. And they also tend to their wings look like the burning flame of a candle. That's not mine. You're going to read about that. Everybody says that. But they really do look just like a burning flame of a candle. They're very stable, where the Merlin's more stable than the kestrel. The peregrine's heavier and more stable than the Merlin. But again, similar to the Merlin, they can pick up speed and turn that afterburner on anytime they want and just fly incredibly fast. So let's see what this guy looks like in flight. Look at those candle flame shaped wings in a soar. They're not swept back. They're straight out perpendicular to the body. Notice a pretty substantial tail that's being fanned quite often. Right there is that flame of a candle, both below and on top, perpendicular to the body, classic peregrine soaring. Also pretty substantial. It's a larger bird. There's quite a size difference between the males and the females. So oftentimes the males tend to give some trouble when comparing to Merlins. In a glide though, these guys have pretty well flat wing profile, glide profile, where the Merlin, if you remember right, was slightly drooped. So that's a little trick that you can look for. This bird actually has a messed up, it's like a feather, one of the flight feathers come off, and it's still there, but it's hanging out. But the flight pattern is still the classic wing beat of a peregrine. It's smooth, it's even, it almost kind of looked like they were whipping the air a little bit, whereas the Merlin's just much more powerful. So let's get into our bootios, the creme de la creme, of course, our red-tailed hawk. You're going to read a lot of the books will always describe the red tail as the bootio to compare all other bootios to. And the reason for that, one of the reasons is, guess what? We see red-tailed hawks all over the place. And because of that, they tend to be a little underrated and we ignore them, similar to something like a cardinal or a turkey vulture for that matter. Well, don't ignore them. They're a great one to get solidified in your head, know how they fly, the shape, everything, because then once that's solidified in your brain, now it makes finding something different that much easier and faster. You'll know, hey, this looks different. It doesn't have this really muscular, huge bodybuilder-like trailing edge to the wing. The flap is different or whatever that you notice. So it's really important to get these in solidified in your brain. It just makes identifying the others much easier. I find, for the size of bird this is overall, they have a pretty fast wing beat relative to that body size. And they have a slight upturned wing, that dihedral, just ever so slightly upturned in a soar. And it's about the same as a golden eagle, which we'll see a little later. And they're very, very muscular. Bob Pettit put it best. One of the ways he always describes, well, what do you mean when you say the bird is muscular? If you take your arm and do, the classic, bodybuilder flex, and then turn that upside down, this part right here, that bicep, that's what we're looking at right here on the trailing edge. So very, very muscular, way more muscular than any other bootio you're going to see. So that's one of the telltale signs of these guys. I absolutely love red tails. They just don't get old for me. Look at that muscular secondary feathers there on this bird, just beautiful. Upturned dihedral, remember that upturned wing? That's the dihedral I'm talking about, slightly upturned. A lot of the other boutios won't show that. There's that bicep muscle turned upside down. That's what I'm talking about right there. Also notice the tail, almost, these wings are so big and muscular, the tail doesn't look like it goes into the body. It almost looks like it goes into the wings. Those wings are so big and broad. These birds stay on course quite well. You could see him kind of flexing and flap here or there to come back on course. You see a bird that has to flap, turn upside down, and say take 4 or 5 flaps to get back on course. That's almost never a red-tailed. That's probably a red-shouldered. And so those are little tricks that you can kind of look for when you're putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Pretty shallow wing beat, I feel. Again, look for that muscular nature to them, that shallow wing beat. And I think the wing beat's pretty powerful, but relative to the size of the bird itself overall, it's a pretty fast wing beat considering how large the bird is. Now the red-tailed cousin, the red-shouldered hawk, this is a juvenile that we see. Their soar profile is a little flatter than a red-tail, but they have a really cool gliding profile where they're heavily, heavily drooped at the ends. And almost no other bootio is going to look that drooped. So I love, you can see this droop, a 1.5 miles out as they're coming at you, and it's like, whoa, got a red-shouldered here. It's a really substantial droop to the wing. These guys, remember how earlier I said if you have what looks to be a bootio and when it gets closer you determine it's an accipiter, that's always a goshawk? Well, red shoulders are kind of the flip of that. If you first think you have an accipiter that turns into a bootio, it's always a red-shouldered hawk. So those two kind of carry over. And the reason for that is these birds look accipiter-like in that their tails look a little longer. They flap their wings. It's much more snappier. It's much quicker than a red-tailed hawk, and it looks accipiter-like. And it's not, oftentimes not until these birds get a little closer that you figure out, oh no, that's a boodio all the way. That tail's not long enough at all. And that's, hey, okay, that's probably a red-shouldered hawk. Let me look for another couple pieces of that puzzle. But again, look for those bowed wings on a soar. And the other cool thing we're going to see in the video is they thrust their wings way far forward in a soar. I mean, it looks like the shape of a C or a bow. It's really cool to see. So we'll look for that here in our video of the red shoulder. Snappy wing beat, very quick. Let's see if this bird will turn for us and we'll see. Oh yeah, right there. See how those wings, especially at the tips, are far forward? That C shape, that bow shape. Also look at the tips. They're very flat. They're not pointed. And that's really important when we get to our broad-winged hawk, because the broad wings are more tipped or pointed. And so these guys have flat, perpendicular tips to their wings. Now we got it. He's flapping again. Look at the tail. For a boodio, it looks a little bit longer than it should. It's showing a little muscular nature in the trailing edge of the wings, but nowhere near the red tail. And the tail goes into the body like we see it should go into the body, not like the red tail. Now we see these drooped wings. We're going to see it here in a second even more definitively. Look at the fingertips. They're very perpendicular to the body. They're not coming to a closed point. I think we'll see an even more pronounced droop to these wings. See how they're drooping below the body there? Classic red-shouldered. And that was a perfect video because you could see absolutely no field marks. That's not a video for someone that wants to see the red shoulders of an adult red shoulder, because you're just not going to see that in flight unless you have the perfect light conditions. So I mentioned our broadwing. These are, you know, the birds that come in big groups all at once. And remember, very early on tonight, I said behavior is one of the traits that we can look for. So we talked about behavior of Merlins, how they go after other birds. Red shoulders, I didn't even mention this, they call a lot. You can hear red shoulders calling from a mile out, and oftentimes you can hear that migration. Broad wings, they come in massive groups. You rarely, unless it's really early or really late in their migration timeline, you're going to see these guys in groups. And so that's a behavioral trait that you can look for in one of those pieces of the puzzle. The shape of their wings looks like a paring knife. For you chefs or cooks out there, go into your kitchen drawer tonight, pull out a paring knife that you might chop up some carrots or, you know, cherry tomatoes with, and it looks like a paring knife. So it goes out, it's flat on the trailing edge all the way out to the tip, but the front, the leading edge goes out, and then it cuts back into the point, and it looks very similar to that paring knife. I always say they look clean and proper and ready for a date. So whether they're an adult or a juvenile or an immature bird, their wings always just look perfectly in place, really clean. Rarely do I ever see broad wings with missing primary feathers or some other issue. They're always just really clean looking. And the way that they, you know, flap their wings, it's very choppy, but it's also quick, similar to that red shoulder. But remember, I said that they don't often flap. They'll only flap more when they're in the end of that stream out. They've lost a lot of altitude, and now they have to flap to keep up to find that next thermal. The rest of the time, you're not going to see them flap when they're soaring. Very, very, very rarely will you see that. So let's see our broadie.
Josh, this is Jessica here.
Yes.
May I interrupt for a quick second? There's one question in the chat that might be helpful to clarify right now.
Okay.
Christina S. is asking, what's the difference between soaring and gliding? Could you clarify that for everyone?
Absolutely. Good question. So,
sorry to interrupt.
No problem. No, I think that's a good one to clarify because we're talking a lot about it. So no worries there. So gliding is when they're on one line going, you know, one direction, and they keep that direction, and they might be flapping and then gliding, flapping, gliding, things like that. They're in one line, either coming, you know, at you, away from you, or straight, in a straight line left or right. Soaring is when they're going in circles. And oftentimes when a raptor is soaring, you see it low, wait a couple seconds because it's going to gain in altitude in most cases, and they're soaring in circles, gaining altitude. So that's basically the difference between soaring and gliding. And for some reason, these birds take on different profiles of their wings depending on whether they're gliding or soaring. So I hope that helped. Let's see our broad-winged video. Classic. Look at those paring knives for wings. Clean, just clean, sharp edges. Everything's in place. Those paring knife wings. We're going to see right here, they kind of go to a tip, where remember in our red-shouldered, they were more stubby or flat or perpendicular to the body. Notice the trailing edge goes straight out and then goes up. The leading edge goes pretty much straight over and then down to its tip. Grab that paring knife and you'll see what that looks like. Again, the soaring birds, not seeing them flat much, a little bit of flex here and there. They're going to have pretty flat wings on that soar. It's another good view of those, that wing shape. Fan tail, it's all about lift. This bird has a huge amount of lift. Now this is a bird at the end of its stream. We get to see that choppy wing beat. You can see the bird get kind of blown off course a little bit. They're a little lighter than the other bootios. If you ever see one of these perch, they look tiny. They're absolutely tiny looking compared to the other birds. That's hard to see in flight, but now we get to see it as this chunky red-tailed comes into the view. You can kind of see the difference, but when you only have one bird in view, you can't judge size. You just can't. There's nothing there relative. So really, it's anybody's guess in terms of that size. And lastly, one of my ever favorites, the rough-legged hawk. This is, I love Whitefish Point. It's one I travel all over the place, and it's one of my favorite places on earth. And this bird is a big reason why. It's a wonderful place to experience rough-legged hawks. If you have any of the brilliant books from the amazing Jerry Ligori, a lot of his rough-legged stuff came from Whitefish Point, actually. It's a wonderful place that is great for roughs. Very thin-winged. There's no muscular nature. I mean, it's absolutely flat in the trailing edge, and they're very long, almost like Northern Harrier long, very thin. And it's a very slow and labored wing beat. And if this clip, if I remember right, you're going to see this bird flap right away, and it's like, whoa, that bird is like so slow in its wing beat, and it's just incredibly different than any other boodio. They're very confident in the air. Whitefish Point, you've got about 17 and a half, 18 miles of water passage that these birds have to cross to make it to Canada. And an adult rough-legged, even in bad winds, they will go for it all day long. It's like they're not afraid of anything. Where oftentimes a lot of the other birds will turn around and take their time. They have a modified dihedral. That's this gliding profile here. Notice how the wing goes up and then over. It doesn't just keep going up at that angle. That's a modified dihedral, and we're going to see turkey vultures do it. The rough-leggeds do it as well. So let's check these Arctic birds from the north. This is why they come late. They're way, way up. Slow, labored wing beat, very long, much more slender wings in terms of the shape. You see that terminal band on the tail out there. Sometimes you get a nice, remember how the red-shouldered had that C shape where the wings are thrust way forward? Rough-leggeds do the same thing, but they're so much longer wing, that's what you're going to look for to determine the difference. Even in the soar, they've got that dihedral, that upturned wing, but remember, it's not modified in a soar. It goes straight out. Slow wing beat. To me, they look like those old little Nerf footballs that used to have the tails when I was a kid, and you throw them around. It's a very stocky little cylinder of a body, and then this tiny thin tail that goes out the back, where red tail's body all the way into the tail. There's that modified dihedral, up and over, classic roughie. Very, very at home in the sky. They don't flap very often. They're so light. They're about the physical size of a red-tailed if you saw them standing next to each other. These guys are almost half of the weight. They're all feather. If you were to pluck one, it'd look like this little mouse. It's crazy. They're just incredibly light. So now our eagles. So we'll start with the famed bald eagle, which, I didn't mention in Detroit River because it's not necessarily a hot species there. I mean, bald eagles are a hot species everywhere. their numbers have just grown. That is just an incredible success story we won't get into tonight, but you want to see bald eagles, go to Lake Erie Metropark for the Detroit River Hawk Watch in September and get ready. You'll see tons of them. They're flat-winged almost all the time. Sometimes in a glide, you know, you'll see them slightly droop their wings. Very, very powerful wing beat, but what's interesting about it is their wing will go much higher above the body than it does below the body. So you'll notice that upstroke goes a lot higher than it does when it's in the downstroke. When these birds are flapping, we're going to see this in the video, when they stop flapping, they stop on a downbeat. Relative to the bald eagle, when we talk about the golden, when it's flapping, it stops on an upstroke and then slowly settles its wings. So little cool difference that you can see. The other big one is these birds appear to have just massive heads, just huge. And part of that is because their bills are so large. So that's one of the easier things to look for, because the golden and especially the turkey vulture, which are the two that look closest to the bald eagle, they have what appears to be either no or very tiny heads. Let's check this guy out. You're gonna notice real quick here, I didn't even say it, but these guys look like 2x8 planks of wood with a head and a tail. Very plank-like wings. And when I say plank-like, it's very rectangular. There's no muscular nature to it. I will say, you can see that. See how rectangular, just straight perpendicular, both the leading edge and trailing edge. Juvenile birds though, first-year birds, will have longer secondary feathers. So that's these feathers right in here. And because they're longer, they look a little bit more broad or muscular. Just a little tip to further confuse us, I guess. Look at that deep upstroke. The wing beat goes higher up in the upstroke above the body than it does down below in the downstroke. And I've got it in slow-mo here. Watch when it stops flapping, it stops on a downstroke right there. So when we play our next video of the golden, we'll look for that, because it's the opposite. There's a nice gliding bird where you can just kind of see a slight bow or downward shape of the wings. And that's our bald eagle. It's a beautiful symbol of our nation. And here's our golden. So these guys tend to have a little bit more broad looking wings. They tend to look more like a boodio than an eagle. So whereas the bald eagle is very plank-like, very rectangular, these guys will oftentimes look a little bit more muscular. They have an upturned dihedral. Remember, we saw on the bald eagle, it's absolutely flat and sore. And so you're not going to see that in a golden eagle. My favorite thing about golden eagles, they have a more floppy wing beat. You ever go by like one of those used car lots with those air things that are like flailing all over the place? That to me is more golden eagle wing flap compared to a bald eagle. Especially, we'll see it in the video. You see the tips are just, they're more loose and more wavy. Look for that dihedral. That's a huge thing. And the last thing, it would be that tiny head compared to the length of the tail, which we'll get into a little bit in the next slide. Here's our golden eagle. Notice it's more shapely. You can see a little bit more muscular nature in the trailing edge of the wing. There's that floppy, loose wing beat where the bald eagle was more stiff. And there's your slight dihedral. It's about the same upturn as say our red-tailed hawk that we went over earlier. As this bird turns around, notice the really tiny head compared to the length of the tail. See that? And this takes on a different shape depending on the angle that you're looking at the bird, but there's another really good angle. It's almost like it doesn't have a head. It's a little covered up by the left wing, but just tiny compared to the bald eagle. Still bigger than a turkey vulture's head, but tiny compared to the bald eagle. Now look at this wing flap, very floppy. And we're going to see here when it goes into slow-mo, notice that when the bird stops flapping, it's going to stop on an upstroke and then slowly settle down, just there. And that, what's so cool about that, that used to be in no books. That tip was in none of the books that I read until I got into Ligori's stuff. And Ligori is the one who brought that tip to us, so pretty cool. The guy is the king. All right, so let's just talk just briefly about head projection on these eagles. This is my point here. If you look at the bald eagle on the right, compare the length of the bald eagle's head to the length of the bald eagle's tail, It's half, or in some cases, like we see here, the same length as the tail. It's so large. You look at the head length of the golden eagle compared to the tail length on the golden eagle on our left side here, and the head is half the length or even smaller in a lot of cases. So that's what we want to look for, especially when they're perpendicular to us at a distance. So let's see what the comparison looks like between these two birds.
Bald and golden eagles are both large and prominent in the sky, but some key differences are easy to pick out once you know what to look for. Even though the bald eagle on the left is closer, it shows thick, rectangular planked wings. It looks like a 2x8 plank of wood with a head and a tail. Speaking of heads, make sure to key in on the size of the head compared to the length of the tail. The bald eagle's head can appear as long as its tail, where the golden's head appears to be half the length of its tail or smaller. The golden on the right appears more bootiol-like with more muscular wings. Notice too, the bald eagle is soaring with flat wings. In comparison, the golden eagle has a slight upturned dihedral. The wing beat of the bald eagle is slow and stiff, but look at that deep upstroke. Golden eagles have slow wing beats as well, but they're uniformly shallow. Check out how the bald eagle ends on a downstroke when flapping. In comparison, the golden eagle ends on an upstroke before settling into its glide.
So you got to see that again side by side. That's that cool comparison feature. Okay, so turkey vulture. Now this we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on turkey vulture because hopefully it's not too difficult a bird for you with the amount we get to see these guys all year. They appear headless. That's one of the coolest things. You know, they don't have any feathers on their heads, so that's part of why their heads look so small. They rarely ever flap. It's a misconception. Some people think they never flap, but they do, and you're going to see it in one of my video clips. And they have an extremely deep wing profile, especially in a soar, and they take on, like I said before, that modified dihedral when they're in that glide, that straight angled flight. Their tail is very stocky and substantial, which is important when we're comparing it to its cousin, the black vulture. And when they do flap, it's very steady and very deep, actually. So let's check out our turkey vulture. Little flex to the shoulder or the wings there. You see vultures do that a lot. Notice how much this bird is rocking and teetering, avoiding flapping its wings at all costs. Notice when it turns, you can see a very stocky rectangular tail and just a classic shape overall. This is a classic vulture gliding by. Now we have a soaring bird. Notice the deep dihedral. That's, again, that upturned wing as we see there. As the bird turns around, notice how it appears headless. It's almost like there's no head there at all. It'll turn. You can just see a little tip of the head there. Almost appears headless. Concentrate on the teetering, unsteady flight. I've been told they're so large winged compared to the weight of the light weight of their body that they're very unsteady. This is a great head-on view of that modified profile, glide profile. And there's that wing beat. Pretty deep, very steady. And hopefully you don't have too much trouble with our turkey vultures. Now this is one though that we don't get to see very often. Very, very rarely do we get to see a black vulture here in Michigan. But I love, look at this photo, look at the feet are as far out as the tail. It's an incredibly short-tailed bird, and oftentimes, which we'll see in the video, the feet look like they're hanging down below and even past the tail. These guys don't look like vultures. They look more like miniature eagles. They have a very fast, hurried, it just feels very hurried, their wing beat. It looks like, you know, like I have two kids, one's 8, one's 2.5. And these guys remind me of my 2-year-old trying to run and keep up with my 8-year-old. It's like they're always trying to keep up with someone else that's faster. And if you're able to see the shimmery trailing edge of the wings, similar to the turkey vulture, they do have that silvery white, but it's only on the tips. It's not the entire trailing edge. These guys look like they've just dipped their tips in some white paint and took off. So it's just the tips of those outer wings. So here's our black vulture. Look at the feet hanging down. That's kind of a classic look. Notice the secondaries, those trailing edge flight feathers there. As they get closer to the tail, they look broad and more muscular. They don't look like a vulture. Look at the fingers. They're flat. They're not pointed. The wing isn't pointed at the end. It's very perpendicular, and you can see those fingers there on the edges. And these birds, even though they don't have feathers on their heads either, relative to their body, their heads look bigger. There's those feet hanging way below. And I think our next clip, we'll get to see them flapping their wings, and you'll see just how much more hurried it is. Almost like, they look like big bats trying to flap in the air. It's crazy. Look how much hurried that is, how much faster it is compared to the turkey vulture we saw just in the last clip. That looks like a bat or an owl, migrating. It's just crazy to me. Okay, here's our Harrier. I mentioned Harriers a little bit earlier. Incredibly long, very slender winged raptors. Very deep dihedral. I think at a really far distance, these guys can look like turkey vultures because they take on that modified glide profile, and they also have a very steep soaring profile. They are quite buoyant in flight. We used that word to describe the flight of the kestrel earlier, but their wing beat's very steady, and they're obviously much larger than a kestrel. And so the tough birds that you're going to have to compare this to are going to be like your rough-legged hawk and maybe a turkey vulture at a really, really far distance. But as they get closer, you'll very easily know they're not a vulture. And they look like they're, I got this tip from Eric Brunke, who's the counter at Cape May, New Jersey. And he described their flap of their wings as if they're slapping the air like they're bouncing a basketball. I thought that was a clever way to describe them, so my hat's off to Eric. And again, they glide with that modified dihedral, which is a really cool thing to look for because it can really narrow your group down to just a couple birds. So notice those really long wings. I know there's that white rump, but like the squared off tail on a Sharpie, you got to be careful with that. Sometimes coops and bootios even will show that. Undertail coverts will fold up and over in high winds and look like they have a white rump. There's that nice wing profile there from the side. You can see how slender. They're very plank-like as well. Like we described the 2x8 plank of wood for the eagle. They're more like a 2x4, very slender, but still rectangular. There's that dihedral there. They're bouncing. He's bouncing that basketball, flying through. Now this bird's gliding, so we're going to see more of a modified dihedral, as you can see here, up and over, similar to our turkey vulture and our rough-legged hawk. So these guys are going to flap a little bit more than, say, the rough-legged hawk. And again, it's more like they're slapping the air. It's not as smooth and steady like you're going to see in the rough-legged hawk. Bouncing the basketball. Slender wing, long-tailed, and that dihedral. Those are the three big pieces of the puzzle that you want to look for. Just slapping the air, bouncing his basketball as he goes south. This was taken at Detroit, actually. And I believe last on our list, you've made it through to the Osprey. So these guys are incredibly specialist type birds. They're in a group all their own. And they prove to be a little bit more tough for shoreline hawkwatch sites because you have to determine as a hawk counter whether you have a local bird who's just milling about hunting, or do you actually have a northern bird who's migrating through. So there's little things that we look for to determine whether it's a migrant or not. These are the birds that everybody thinks is a gull at first. So if you think you have a gull and then it comes closer and you know it's a raptor, it's going to be an osprey every time. They're the only ones who are white and black and look like gulls. Very long wings. These guys, when they flap, they look arthritic, like they are in pain and they want nothing more than to stop flapping their wings. We're gonna see that in the video. They just look really stiff, like maybe they just woke up and they haven't really stretched yet. Very painful looking wing flap. And in all aspects of flight, their wings are slightly bowed. In a glide profile, even heavier bowed. And when they're in flight, you can always see this shape of an M when you can see them, especially soaring. So we'll see that as we watch the video. So remember, look for that downward bow. They're always arced or bowed. There's that M. Look for the shallow shape of a capital M. I think I'm going to stop. This video should stop here in a minute. We'll look at that a little closer. Long gull-like wings. There we go. So it goes up, down, similar to the letter M. Very gull-like. The only raptor that we're going to see that takes on that white and brown kind of pattern, especially here in the Midwest. Some of the kites can take on that look down south or into Texas. But around here, it's always an osprey with that coloration. Again, all aspects of flight, you're going to see slightly bowed wings. They're very, very steady at soaring, and this is a bird that's at home over water. Here's a bird that's flapping. It just looks like, oh man, I've got to flap, but I really don't want to flap my wings because it hurts. And I'm going to try to get back to gliding as much and as fast as possible. This bird's also in very heavy winds at Cape May, New Jersey, right after a hurricane moved through. So he's really struggling to keep his line. And this is for a bird that's typically really steady in flight. So that gives you an idea of just how windy it was. So Jessica, Juliet, Mike, we can probably take a pause to maybe answer some questions. But while we do that, for the rest of everybody, be looking at this slide and think about what side-by-side combination you want to see. Type it in the chat, and then Jessica can kind of monitor which ones are the most popular, and then I can play whatever ones you guys want to see. So Jessica, you want to maybe call out a couple questions that maybe came over the chat?
Yeah, everyone feel free to either unmute yourself and we can ask questions, or pop your questions in the chat. But two questions that came in both publicly or privately to me. One was asking about, do you have recommendations for a quick field guide reference, like a one sheet that people could take to the field with them?
I do. I'm a little bit biased though, because it's the product that I have on Hawks on the Wing. I have a laminated pocket guide that's brilliant for the field. And so it's laminated, it folds up, you can stick it in your back pocket or your backpack. A lot of people will put them in like their glove compartment so they have it on the road. If you go to any nature shop, or right now, you have to go online. A lot of things are closed, but I think Peterson and maybe Sibley, there's a few laminated guides for Raptors out there. The difference with the Hawks on the Wing one, though, is it's all about flight. So if you want more about nesting, breeding, perching type things, that's not the one for you. If you're interested in learning flight technique, the one from me is really the best way to go. The other one, there's a silhouette guide that if you go to Detroit, oftentimes they'll have them to give out in just, pieces of paper. And I think Humana actually carries it in a laminated form as well. So if you want a silhouette style guide, you can get that through humana.org as well.
And one other question that came to me was, when you have a kettle of thousands and thousands of broad-winged hawks, for example, do we have anecdotal stories about what happens when these birds go down for the night in such and such town? What does that experience look like for the folks who see these birds at the tail end of the evening?
It's pretty amazing. So I will tell you though that we have to keep in mind that when we see, let's say 10,000 birds come through in a day at Detroit, they're oftentimes not stopping in Detroit. They're funneled into that choke point, so we get to see the 5,000 together because they're all coming in at the same time. But once they go past Detroit, they start to spread out again. If you remember that little chart I had early on, they spread back out, and you don't see them in these massive, massive chunks of birds the rest of the way down to Mexico. And so they spread out, and they're, unless a storm comes in and puts them down at the right time when they're in big groups, oftentimes they go unnoticed. There might be extra birds here and there, but they're hiding. They're not using they're using almost no energy to migrate because they're rarely flapping. And so they don't have to hunt and eat as much, but they'll hunt in the morning, before they fly if they need it. But oftentimes they go unnoticed. One of my favorite stories though, or experiences that I had, I was on a tower in Panama, experiencing raptor migration in October. And October in the jungle environment, the afternoon heat brings these crazy, torrential storm downpours and storms that pop in. And little did we know that we had broad wings above the clouds. And this huge storm moves in, and all of a sudden we see stooping or diving broadwings popping out of the clouds, going straight down into the forest canopy. And that next morning when we went out early birding, we were seeing broadwings in the trees, perched all over the place. And so that was a phenomenon that brought them down and a group down right on top of us to where we could experience them. So that was really neat.
One other question from the group. This is a follow-up about your field reference one sheet. Are your downloadable Hawks on the Wings videos, are they high res like Blu-ray, or are they better? What's the quality of the videos?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can do it basically 3 ways. We offer a Blu-ray, which is full 1080p, high resolution. That's your best quality. And the digital download is 1080p as well. So you're going to have that same quality. And then we also offer it on DVD, which is it's not considered high definition, but there is a surprising amount of people that don't have Blu-ray players. And really now in today's environment, you wouldn't need to buy one because everything's digital now. So yeah, it's all high resolution if you either do the digital download or the Blu-ray, and then the DVD is for folks that don't want to download it or don't have a Blu-ray player.
And there came in another question about, for someone who's starting out brand new in this process of learning all of their Hawks in flight, is it easier to learn bird by bird, or how do you go about the process of absorbing all of this information all at once?
That question is that's right on, because I didn't mention it. Think about, many of us don't just like raptors. We like all birds. And so being in Southeast Michigan, many of you have probably heard of McGee Marsh and going to see the warblers at McGee. And if you're like me, when I first went to McGee, I played the warbler songs the entire 2.5, 3-hour drive for me. We played the songs the whole way there, and we arrived thinking, we got this, we're pros, no problem. The first bird we hear, we have no idea what it is. And so my point is, we overwhelmed ourselves and tried to learn all of them all at once. And so my advice to you all is concentrate on just a couple at a time. And what's cool about this is because they migrate at different times. Right now, you could go and concentrate on Sharpies and Coops and just enjoy the other birds you see, but don't worry about trying to identify them, and really focus all of your energy on determining Sharpies and Coops. The other thing is, at Detroit, and really any of our sites here in Michigan, we have far more Sharpies that come through than Coops in terms of migration. And so that can give you a false sense of, well, 75% of the time it's a Sharpie, so I'm just going to say it's a Sharpie. Well, that's not a good way to learn. And so a better way is to go to a site specifically that has a more even spread of Sharpies and Coops. Cape May, New Jersey is that site, by the way. They're almost even. And so a little tip, Sharpies tend to fly a lot earlier. They'll start at sunrise and start migrating. And Coops will often hunt in the early morning, and they'll kind of wait and then start migrating mid-morning to late morning. So you see Accipiter really early, it's probably a Sharpie. But back to the question, the point is, don't overwhelm yourself. Learn a couple, focus on a couple, at a time. Maybe come back in November and focus on rough-legged hawk. You can spread it out that way.
I think I caught most of the questions. So Josh, I texted you the 4 different comparisons that I was seeing were most common. Peregrine versus Merlin, red shoulder versus red tail, Goss versus Coopers, Goss versus Broadwing.
Okay.
And anyone else, if you have other questions, keep feeding them through the chat.
All right.
And
So
I'm sure we'll have time for a few more questions.
Yeah, and I know it's getting late, but I'm good for anyone who wants to hang in there. So Peregrine and Merlin, here we go.
While peregrine falcons are larger in size, in some cases they can be confused with Merlins. The peregrine on the right has a slower wing beat than the faster flapping Merlin on the left. Compared to Merlins, peregrines have longer wings and a stockier, thicker appearance. Notice the wings on the Merlin are more swept back to a point, where the peregrine has slender wings that come to a point in the middle, kind of like an arrow. They are also straight out from its body. When seen in migration, peregrines will also soar more often than the active Merlin. Merlins hold their wings flat or slightly drooped when soaring, where peregrines are flat or slightly raised. In high winds, the peregrine flaps faster than normal, but the bird stays stable, where the Merlin is much more erratic.
Okay. The next one was red-shouldered and red-tailed. Play that next.
In active flight, notice the red-tailed hawk on the left has a slightly slower wing beat. It is also more bulky and muscular looking than the red-shouldered hawk. The red-shouldered hawk will also rise and fall in altitude as it's less stable due to its lighter weight. While there is a size difference between these two hawks, this is hard to realize when they're alone in the sky. In a soar, look how much farther forward the red-shouldered on the right is pushing its wings ahead. The red-tailed also shows very muscular trailing edges to its wings. The red-tailed hawk also holds its wings in a slightly upturned dihedral when soaring, where the red-shouldered holds its wings mostly flat. In all facets of flight, the red-tailed hawk will appear more stable than a red-shouldered, and when brought off course, they only need a single flap or two to regain control.
Okay, I think we had Goss and Coop. Right here. So this is northern goshawk and Cooper's hawk.
Even though goshawks are larger than Cooper's hawks, size is often hard to judge with lone birds. Check out the goshawk on the left. The bird has a thicker, square-looking tail and slightly stockier-looking wings, giving hints of striving to be a bootiot. The Cooper's hawk on the right is long-tailed with thinner-looking wings compared to the goshawk. When soaring, these birds hold their wings in a slightly different manner. The goshawk holds its wings flat, where the coop is showing a slight upturn or dihedral. Just as sharpies make tighter circles than coops when soaring, coops make tighter circles than goshawks. Notice how in control the goshawk is on the left. Its wing beat is also very smooth and powerful. In contrast, the Cooper's hawk is flapping more and seems less stable as it rises and drops in the air. Look at the goshawk's large head and extreme bulging on the trailing edges of its wings. The coop is stocky, but nowhere near as muscular.
And then I know we had another one you sent, but I saw one that came privately to me, bald eagle and osprey. So let's check that one out.
Any shoreline hawk watch will have its share of bald eagles and ospreys, so it's worth understanding how to tell them apart. Ospreys are thin, long-winged raptors, where bald eagles are rectangular and thick-winged. Notice the difference between these two birds. The bald eagle on the left looks like a 2x8 plank of wood with a head and tail. The osprey on the right displays its classic, long, crooked, thin wings. Everything about the osprey is thinner than the bald eagle. The bald eagle also holds its wings flat, where the osprey will hold its wings slightly drooped. The wing beat of the bald eagle is slow and powerful. The bird is in control and very stable. Also check out that deep upstroke. The osprey continues to show its drooped wings and has a faster wing beat. It's also stiff and almost feels like the bird is in pain. Ospreys are also affected far more by winds than bald eagles.
Okay, maybe our last one, I think it was Goss and Broadwing. Do we have that one? Yes.
goshawks do have boodio tendencies, but plenty of accipiter features remain. In a soar, both birds hold their wings at right angles to their bodies and hold them flat, but notice how the broadwing hawk on the right has its tail fanned, more like a boodio, and its wings taper from the front edge of the wing to a sharper point at the end. Also notice the broadwing hawk appears more stable when soaring and seems to avoid flapping as much as possible. The deep wing beat of the goshawk on the left shows power and is very rhythmic. The broadwing hawk has a quick wing beat for a boodio, uses the entire length of the wing, and it's shallower. Also notice the body of the goshawk is stockier and extends behind the wings, making their tail look thicker. It appears to be an extension of their body.
Okay, I think that's probably enough for tonight. It's been quite a long program and a lot of information to cover. So I don't know, Jessica, if you had any last minute questions come in. I mean, I can hang out for a minute, but thank you very much for joining me, everybody.
Yeah, no new questions have come in. So on behalf of all of the board of Washtenaw Audubon and our members and Juliet, our president, I hope her internet has picked back up again, but I will just say thank you so much, Josh, and we're so appreciative of you taking the time to teach us all quite a lot tonight.
You are most welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me. And hopefully I'll see some of you guys out at the
Yes.
Hawk Watch one of these times.
Tomorrow and Friday are supposed to be great for broadwings. Lots of north and northeast winds.
Josh, that was outstanding.
should,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mike.
it was fabulous, Josh.
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks everyone for coming. We'll end there.
Sayonara.